help those who are in the middle class, or critics have said that he's really going to end up helping the rich?
Okay, so yes, I think the president's framework, as it's been laid out, focusing on both corporate tax reform and simplifying tax policies on the individual side, is indeed the absolute right framework, with one big if or but, and that is, how are we going to fill in the pay-fors? You have to broaden the base and lower the rate. Broadening the base means getting rid of loopholes, and for every loophole, there are about a gazillion tax lobbyists lining up to protect it. And so we need to talk about those details. That can really make a big difference. And then here's the big tension. The things that will actually help to grow the economy are not always the exact same thing that will help the middle class in the immediate moment in terms of tax cuts. And I would rather see us focus on a really comprehensive plan for tax reform that will grow the economy, and then figure out how we're going to ensure that the gains from growth, which are permanent, will actually benefit the middle class and not just go to the upper end. I think when they're talking about increasing the top individual rate, that's a clever idea if you have a lower corporate rate and a higher individual rate at the top. But I worry we focus too much on middle class tax breaks, and how I want to help the middle class and the overall economy is see comprehensive tax reform that grows the economy but doesn't grow the debt. I think that's really the key here. And there's some hard choices involved we have to start talking about.
Indeed, hard choices indeed. And as real quickly, you talked about the 2018 budget. And one of the things that we saw there in Garrett Tenney's report was how the Republicans are actually kind of doing that as a political maneuver to get to that reconciliation so they can pass their tax reform with only 50 votes if Republicans agree, and they can exclude Democrats. That doesn't bode well in terms of getting it done, because we've seen what happened with health care reform.
Well, in some ways it may make it easier if you only need Republicans and you need fewer voters, but it makes it less durable. It means that as soon as we pass this tax plan, the fight will start again. Should we repeal it? And we don't want to go through repeal and replace again. We want tax reform that's going to stick, that's going to be permanent, and again, that's going to be good for us in the long run. So what I really think is, let's work on doing this right. I don't think the timeline matters. I think the real structure matters. And we need to understand that growing the economy can benefit all of us in wages, through higher wages, but you can't keep the tax loopholes that exist. We have to really look at those.
Maya McGinnis, thank you. I could talk to you for hours about this. You make it very simple and very understandable. So thank you so much for your perspective today. Have a great day.
You too.
All right.
President Trump is celebrating the defeat of ISIS in Raqqa. Syrian forces backed by the U.S. clearing out militants from their stronghold in Syria. The city was the terror group's self-proclaimed capital. Trump says military operations there will transition into a new phase. The commander-in-chief says in a statement, quote, "Together with our allies and partners, we will support diplomatic negotiations that end the violence, allow refugees to return safely home, and yield a political transition that honors the will of the Syrian people."
Spain's political crisis escalating even more as protesters again take to the streets. What's sparking this latest turmoil? Plus, President Trump's former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, blasting former President George W. Bush. Why? Our panel will weigh in next.
He has no earthly idea whether he's coming or going, just like it was when he was President of the United States.
Steve Bannon, one of President Trump's closest former advisors, slamming President George W. Bush, saying he was the most destructive president ever. It's just his latest attack on the GOP establishment. Bannon spoke last night at the California Republican Party convention, just one day after President Bush gave a speech denouncing bigotry and nativism in the United States.
President Bush, to me, embarrassed himself. Speechwriter wrote a highfalutin speech. It's clear he didn't understand anything he was talking about. He equates the Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution, globalization. He has no earthly idea whether he's coming or going, just like it was when he was President of the United States. I want to apologize up front to any of the Bush folks outside in this audience, okay? Because there's not been a more destructive presidency than George Bush's.
Let's bring in our political panel, Richard Fowler, Fox News contributor and radio talk show host, and Lawrence Jones from Blaze TV, and also host of his own radio show. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Lawrence, it's no surprise. Anytime Steve Bannon speaks, he's going to stir attention. However, speaking ill of a former Republican president, is that necessary right now if he's trying to also at the same time push through the GOP message?
Yeah, I don't think that's necessary, and it's definitely untrue as well. I would caution Mr. Bannon to be cautious when talking about W, especially since there are a lot of Republicans that still like W. I thought it was refreshing to hear from W because he doesn't speak often publicly, and I think he kind of calmed the storm with his speech. So, yeah, I think that's awful of Mr. Bannon to do such.
I mean, when you look at how the president was elected, and there are a lot of conservatives and those that are further on the right that maybe don't necessarily find President Bush as a remarkable president. You have to wonder if he's alienating the Republicans that do love President Bush. I mean, he is a very well-respected man. Richard, does he run the risk of alienating those Republicans, especially with the midterm elections coming around?
Alienating those Republicans, but it's very clear that Steve Bannon and Donald Trump are the head of this Republican Party. They won the past presidential election. They won the primary. Well, let's be very clear. They swept the primary, defeating George W. Bush's brother and other more mainstream Republicans. And so they are the head of this party, and they are the direction based on Republican primary voters of where the party wants to go.
Right.
And George W. Bush is the way of the past. So they are the leaders of the party. They're dictating the direction.
And that did work
simple.
on the campaign trail, Lawrence. I mean, they wanted to run anti-establishment. He didn't want money from PACs. He didn't want to consider himself part of the establishment. He was a new candidate. And part of the establishment is the Bush family. I mean, that they are what, in definition, is the establishment when you talk about the Republican
establishment. Better call the swamp, Julie. They call it the swamp.
Right, and there's a lot of Bush's policies that I disagree with, but I would disagree with Richard when he says that Bannon is a leader of the Republican Party. I think Donald Trump is. Bannon is more of that wing, like the Tea Party wave, that are constantly going against the establishment. And so I think there's a separation between even the president now and Mr. Bannon. You're going to see a lot of the people that the president endorsed in a lot of these primaries that Steve Bannon is going to go against him with. And so he's coming from more of an anti-establishment wave. And now President Trump is kind of part of the establishment, even though he's not quite the establishment candidate. He is the leader.
I beg to differ on that a little bit here, Julie. I think if you were to ask President Trump, I don't think he would say he's the establishment. And his main mantra and the Make America Great Again slogan is, the Make America Great Again slogan is drain the swamp. And the ideal of the swamp is the establishment. And I don't think President Trump would be in this White House if it weren't for Steve Bannon's leadership and helping him get there. So Steve Bannon and Donald Trump are connected, and they are the leaders of this Republican Party.
I mean, Steve Bannon did play a very critical role when it came to advising the president. I mean, he was coming from a non-political background, and I mean, you have to give it to Steve Bannon. He did get his base out there to those far-right voters that voted for President Trump, and Steve Bannon's a good reason why he got a lot of that attention.
Yeah, but the problem is Bannon is not the problem with the Republican Party right now. The people that he's targeting is the Senate. A lot of those candidates aren't going along with the agenda. So it's more of an agenda focus. This whole establishment versus anti-establishment, I think that's a relevant discussion. The discussion is, are they going to go along with the agenda or not?
That's what they need to worry about, is the agenda and actually getting something passed, because the House has passed over 200 bills and they've all died in the Senate. So I guess Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, how concerned should he be? Now health care is a bust so far. What about tax reform? How concerned should he be about that? Lawrence?
Oh, he should be very concerned. I don't see it getting passed just because he can't get control of his caucus. And so, as you noted in the beginning of the segment, over 200 bills passed by the House, and they eventually die in the Senate. So that's a problem for if the Senate can't get on board with the agenda, then they're going to be out of office.
Richard, I want to be fair. I want to give you the quick last final word.
Well, I think I actually agree with Lawrence on this point. If Republican senators can't get on board the Steve Bannon, Donald Trump agenda, then Donald Trump and Steve Bannon are going to run candidates against them. The president and Steve Bannon have been very clear on that point. So if you can't get along with the far-right Bannon agenda, get ready to be primaried by Steve Bannon and Donald Trump. They want to drain the swamp. This is what they're going to do.
They're two different.
All right.
But I gotta say, Julie, they're two different candidates. You'll see the president endorse a different candidate than Steve Bannon. You've seen that in past elections.
And the Steve Bannon candidates happen to win. Look at Alabama.
All right. Lawrence Jones, Richard Fowler, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Kelly.
I think they're still talking. Anyway.
Yeah, get each other's cell phone numbers and continue
Singer
that.
Mariah Carey, the latest celebrity victim in a rash of Hollywood home break-ins. What experts say is emboldening those criminals. Plus, could this be the future of high-speed travel? A 30-minute fast lane between two major cities.
Fashion and politics on display at the Smithsonian. First Lady Melania Trump is donating the dress she wore at the inaugural ball to the museum's permanent collection. The one-of-a-kind cream silk gown was created by French designer Hervé Pierre, who had only 2 weeks to come up with this design. The dress will be part of the First Lady's collection. That collection is one of the most popular exhibits at the museum.
Indeed it is. I've actually been to that exhibit before. Imagine being able to travel to New York from Washington in half an hour. Well, it may soon be a reality. Transportation pioneer Elon Musk getting the green light to start his Hyperloop project in Maryland by digging tunnels beneath a highway there. The high-speed underground transit system will make stops in Baltimore and Philadelphia en route to New York. That would be amazing.
How would you like that for your commute?
Hey, I would do it every day.
How long is your commute? You go by train or plane or automobile? How do you get around?
About 4 hours.
4 hours. Yeah. And he does this every...
I could do that in a half hour. Elon Musk, see me.
I like it.
I love it.
It looks like a ride you'd see at Disney World or something.
I could be his test. Hey, that's going to do it for us right now. We'll be back here at 4 p.m. Eastern. We know that you'll stick around and join us. 1 hour from now, we'll see you then. And also, I hope to see you on the Fox Report 7 o'clock tonight. The Journal Editorial Report. Are you going to say 10? Yeah, I have no idea.
Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. A big step forward this week in the Republican tax reform effort as the Senate passed a budget blueprint Thursday night that paves the way for $1.5 trillion in tax cuts and blocks Democrats from filibustering a final deal. So can the GOP deliver on that deal before year's end? Let's ask Wall Street Journal Deputy Editor Dan Henninger, columnist Kim Strassel, editorial page writer Kate Batchelder-Odell, and columnist Bill McGurn. So, Dan, let's start here. Are the Republicans getting their act together on taxes after the health care fiasco?
I guess the short answer would be yes, Paul. They actually got 51 votes to pass a budget rather than 48 or 49 and failed to pass a piece of legislation.
Everybody but Rand Paul.
Everybody but Rand Paul, and it's too bad, I think, that Senator Thad Cochran had to be wheeled all the way from Mississippi on his sick bed. You'd think his other fellow senators like Collins, Murkowski, and McCain could have committed themselves to voting for this and not make him come. But that's the way the Senate Republicans work now. The budget was basically a conceit at this point, a stepping stone to get towards tax reform. And I do feel as though these Republicans now have the sense that they are embarked on something very serious, have a little bit of wind at their back, and now we're going to go forward to the tax reform and do something that the president and every member of the party, with perhaps the exception of Rand Paul, really wants to do.
And Kate, the key here is the $1.5 trillion bogey here, which lets them cut taxes by that net amount. So they're not hostage to the scoring from the Congressional Budget Office entirely. They're not hostage to the Joint Tax Committee, these institutions created by Democrats years ago that tend to make it harder to reform taxes.
That's right, yes. I mean, basically, that's a conservative number on how much revenue we could expect to flow to the Treasury for growth.
Why?
CBO says that for every 0.1% you add to GDP, you get about $270 billion in revenue. CBO is not a pro-growth institution, so those are conservative estimates. And CBO also assumes that the economy grows at 1.9% over the next 10 years.
That's their estimate.
Which is very weak. So a return to 3% growth, the historical norm, would produce more than 2.7 trillion under CBO's rough calculation. So 1.5 trillion, which is what the Senate is considering, is relatively conservative.
But there's no guarantee that the House Budget Committee, the House budget passed its own reform, and they had deficit neutral. There's no guarantee right now that the House will accept the Senate.
That's right, but they really need to stick to this 1.5 trillion because it's the only way to finance lower rates, and they have to pay for those rates. So the House now can either pick up the Senate's version or go to conference, and my view is they should just pick it up and pass it, and we can be done with this.
Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think the Senate version is the best vehicle for getting to where they want to be on tax reform. Look, the passing of the budget is mostly symbolic, right? It's not so much a big victory as its defeat would have killed tax reform. That's the real importance.
Well, and you have to have it to get the 51 vote threshold.
Right. And I think I'm optimistic because, look, you never know what John McCain's going to do. He voted against the Bush tax cuts when he was senator, then ran on tax cuts when he was running for president. But I think Republicans are much more, there are two things. They're more comfortable making this argument about growth and incentives and taxes than they were about Obamacare, which was cast, Obamacare repeal, which was cast as taking insurance away from people. I think they're more comfortable on this, and I think they understand the downside of first the humiliation on Obamacare repeal and then on tax reform would personally come back to haunt a lot of them in 2018.
Kim, do you give much credit here to the much maligned Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who behind the scenes was working with Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania and Bob Corker of Tennessee on the Budget Committee to try to get together a budget hawk like Corker and a tax cutter like Toomey to be able to put together this deal? Does McConnell get credit for that?
He gets immense credit. People like to talk about the Senate as the graveyard where all good legislation goes to die. But in this case, it was a House that could not get its act together, in part because of what Dan said. There was this conceit that the budget really matters in terms of the deficit or spending. Of course, what we all know is that it bears no relation in the end to actual spending. This was solely a vehicle for tax reform. So McConnell went and not only did he get Corker and Toomey and set the blueprint for this, which I do think the House is going to take, but he also got a lot of senators this last week to start talking about the fact that this is only a vehicle for tax reform, to drop the illusion that the budget part of it matters, and that should pressure House Republicans to go along.
All right, peer inside, if you can, Dan, the mind of Rand Paul, who is a libertarian, claims to be for small government, like tax cuts. Why would he vote against something that makes tax reform possible?
You know, you had me thinking there of Johnny Carson for a moment, the great Karnak, what's in my head. And yeah. Rand Paul, it's difficult to know, other than it seems to be about Rand Paul. And on either health care or taxes, there is a sense in which you are doing this for the good of the country.
Well,
right?
one hopes.
One would hope. So Rand Paul, by definition, seems to be doing it for the good of Rand Paul. And he's become the biggest outlier in the Republican Party and the Senate that we have seen in a very long time.
All right, thank you all. When we come back, a final push by U.S.-backed forces in Raqqa outs the Islamic State from its self-declared capital. So does the U.S. have a post-ISIS strategy for the Middle East? Backed forces in Syria declared victory this week in the northern city of Raqqa, dealing a major blow to ISIS in its de facto capital. Raqqa's liberation by the Syrian Democratic Forces, a coalition of Kurdish and Arab militias, may mark the end of Islamic State's self-declared caliphate in Iraq and Syria. But does the U.S. have a strategy for a post-ISIS Middle East? Let's ask retired four-star General Jack Keane. He's a Fox News military analyst. So, General, welcome. Good to have you back. Let me ask you first, before we get to Raqqa, about General John Kelly's statement at the White House on Thursday. What did you make of that statement?
Well, I've never seen anything quite like that 17-minute message that he delivered to the American people. The eloquence of his conviction, sincerity, and his emotion was just a powerful civic lesson to the American people, letting them understand the most sacred process we have in this country dealing with our fallen. And I absolutely agree with his rather crushing rebuke of Congresswoman Wilson in entering into that process and discrediting the soldier and his family as a result of exposing it to a public discussion and debate.
All right, thank you. Now, on Raqqa, how big a defeat is this, losing that territory, that second capital, after they've lost Mosul in Iraq? How big a defeat for ISIS?
Yeah, it is. I mean, they're the first terrorist organization in some time that took a safe haven right in the middle of a very active country like that. And this is a very resilient organization. Several hundred fighters moved into Syria because of the stalemated civil war. They were all Iraqi fighters in 2012. A year and a half later, under al-Baghdadi's leadership and his other leaders, they grew to 30,000 when they invaded Iraq in 2014. This organization is not going away. The caliphate certainly is. They will still be a challenge for us in the Middle East. They've expanded into 30 other countries.
Right.
They've attacked NATO, either inspired or directed, 39 times in the last 2.5 years. Nonetheless, this is a major accomplishment for the United States. We should feel good about it. We should feel good about the coalition that did this. But we've got to take their finances away. We've got to take their virtual caliphate away and stay on top of them.
Okay, now how much credit here do you think the Trump administration gets for this victory as opposed to the Obama administration? Because the Obama administration folks say, look, all the Trump folks are doing is basically following through on our strategy. Yes or no?
Well, the Obama administration made a strategic error. The main effort should always have been the caliphate in Syria because that was their headquarters. We made the main effort Iraq, and yet we had to wait for a year and a half to get the troops retrained to be able to do it. During that entire time, we should have taken this caliphate away. And in my judgment, ISIS would not have become this significant, iconic force it became and be able to direct its activities worldwide. 5 years in that caliphate was much too long. All that said, the facts are that the Trump administration came in, took the Obama plan, but made it more effective. Easing up on the rules of engagement, putting artillery in there, Apache helicopters, giving the commanders on the ground full authority to conduct a war, no micromanaging out of the White House. So they deserve credit for changing how we operate and making those operations more effective.
Okay, now let's move on from here. What now? Because I don't detect, frankly, any clear U.S. strategy of what happens next, what we want to do next in Syria or Iraq. Can you decipher one?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have to clear out the rest of the Euphrates River Valley southeast of Raqqa, where the leaders of Raqqa are still. They've been out of Raqqa for some time. Secondly, I agree with what you just said. I don't see a strategy to deal with Syria writ large. In other words, the western part of Syria, Iran, Russia, and Assad, they are in total control, and there's no taking that away from them without conducting a major military operation where there's no political will for that. But the eastern part of Syria, we should be containing Iran's ambitions to take full control of Syria by taking the east. And I don't see any strategy to stop that, Paul, and I think that's a strategic mistake on the part of the administration.
That's right. Okay, so I agree with you on that. Now the Kurds are saying, the Kurds who were our fighters on the ground in clearing out ISIS out of Raqqa, and they're saying, hey, you know, we'd like to keep this territory. We have a right to at least some autonomy here. Can the U.S. How should we treat the Kurds in their ambitions going forward?
In Iraq, the issue has always been the political end state. Can the Iraqis keep a country together with the Sunnis and the Shias and the Kurds operating, at least coexisting together? And we knew that the challenges would be there after ISIS, and here they are right in front of us. I think the United States has got to get involved in this. The Iranians are in full, back in the government of Iraq, stomping all over the Kurds. We've got to stop that from happening. I think, yes, the Kurds should have more autonomy than they currently have, is something we should negotiate. I'm not talking about complete independence.
Right.
I think the fact that they were the fighters on the ground for 18 months while the Iraqi army was trying to get its act together, there should be major concessions to them. I think maybe a higher percentage of oil that they should receive as a result of that. The government of Iraq has to make some concessions to the Kurds, or else we're going to find ourselves likely in some kind of civil war here. The Iranians could care less about the Kurds, and they have considerably more political influence over the government of Iraq than the United States have. And that is a strategic mistake the Obama administration has. And I'm hoping the Trump team steps up here and realizes how important U.S. political influence on the government of Iraq is to the future stability of that country.
All right. Thank you, General Keane. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good talking to you.
When we come back, our panel weighs in on America's post-ISIS strategy in the Middle East, as well as John Kelly's powerful defense of President Trump's condolence call to a Gold Star widow.
I said to him, sir, there's nothing you can do to lighten the burden on these families. But let me tell you what I tell them. And let me tell you what my best friend, Joe Dunford, told me, because he was my casualty officer. He said, Kel, he was doing exactly what he wanted to do when he was killed.
That was White House Chief of Staff John Kelly in an emotional and very personal defense of President Trump's phone call this week to the widow of a slain Army soldier. Mr. Kelly describing on Thursday what it was like to learn about his own son's death in Afghanistan and calling criticism of the president unfair. We're back with Dan Henninger, Bill McGurn, and Wall Street Journal editorial board member Mary Kissel. So, Bill, you've been in the White House. You know presidents have to make calls like that. What did you make of Joe?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in the White House, I saw President Bush do this quite often, to meet with the families. And in fact, I brought in 2 different moms of Marines that had been killed, one Jewish mom from Vermont and one Catholic mom from Massachusetts. It's an incredible thing to watch. People deal with the commander-in-chief on whose orders your son, husband, brother probably died. John Kelly brought 2 terrible attributions into that. One, he's the father of a Marine, so he's gone through it that way. Also, he was a Marine commander who gave orders knowing that it would result in the death of very good Marines.
So he speaks with tremendous moral
He does, and I urge people to Google it, to read the transcript, and go back and read another speech that John Kelly gave the day after his son was killed, about 2 Marines who stood their ground against a truck bomb. It's just an incredible kind of thing.
Dan, do you think there's going to be any fallout from this in a good sense, in that, you know, we really kind of reached the low here when we are politicizing grief and sacrifice of soldiers, which is what's happened, and politicizing a phone call from Trump. Will we all kind of step back and give a pause here, or are we just going to keep going down?
I think most of us are going to step back, Paul, but the question is, are the 2 main parties to this fiasco going to step back? And that would be the White House press corps and the President of the United States. All right? Look, what John Kelly was trying to say here is that he could not believe we would reach the point where the press was playing gotcha, as they do every day of the week, and then the president was cracking back with tweets against this Democratic Congresswoman. Where is the level of seriousness about the nation's business? And I think John Kelly felt he had an obligation to come forward and say, this has got to stop. If you cannot even be serious over the death of a fallen soldier, how can you be serious about the rest of the nation's business?
All right, Mary, let's move on to ISIS and Syria. I want to pick up where General Keane left off. What do you think about the strategy here? Do you detect one on the part of the Trump administration of what we do now that the caliphate is gone?
Yeah, I think I'm with you and General Keane here, Paul. I don't think that there is a strategy for Syria or for Iraq. And actually, in some respects, the president's strategy in the Middle East is a little bit schizophrenic, because on the one hand, he did a deal with Russia in Syria, which also gave shelter to Iran and jihadis in Syria.
This is for the ceasefire in southern Syria near Israel.
That's right. And then on the other hand, he came out with a big speech in these last days saying, you know what, we're going to contain Iran's ambitions in the Middle East. So there isn't a strategy. The war on Islamic State has not been won. We still have thousands of fighters straddling the border between Syria, Iraq, and as General Keane said, in many, many countries around the world. And look, I just don't think you can get rid of the ISIS threat in Syria without getting rid of Assad. And it's a truth that this administration doesn't want to talk about, but I'm afraid to say, Paul, that I think that's
well, you know, another potential casualty of this is that both Secretary of Defense Mattis and NSC Director General McMaster after, have made a point about the United States reconstituting their association with our allies, whether in Asia or in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia. But if the administration, the president, has a kind of half-in, half-out attitude towards something that Mary just described, our allies in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, the Kurds, who we just have more or less abandoned to the Iraqis and the Iranians, are going to stand back and say, I don't know if we can get in this fight that you're going to try to take to the Iranians.
But Mary, the president just in the campaign, basically what he said about the Middle East is, I'm going to defeat ISIS, I'm going to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. He didn't say anything else about what to do in Syria. He had no strategy, no plan, and I don't see any real willingness to deploy any American troops back there.
Well, the president also said he was going to get out of Afghanistan, remember that? And then he spent 6 months studying the issue, and he went on national television and said, you know what, I made a mistake during the campaign, I was wrong, here's my comprehensive strategy, we are changing tack here in the White House, and hopefully he will do the same thing when it comes to policy in the Middle East.
I agree with that. I think we might never get a coherent Trump doctrine. I think that what we're likely to get is some of what we have now, where the parts are better than the whole. And I will say this victory in Iraq, in Raqqa, one of the things that it does is exposes a complete falsehood that our choice, as Obama used to say all the time, was between a full-scale invasion or doing nothing. It should give us hope that if you can support local forces with some troops and some air support and some operations capacity, you can accomplish a lot. So I think we have to hope for Donald Trump. I don't think he's going to give us the kind of Reagan doctrine or Bush doctrine that we got before.
I think that's a fair bet. Still ahead, two officials behind the so-called Trump dossier take the fifth before the House Intelligence Committee as the wide-ranging probe into Russia's influence in the 2016 campaign continues. We'll have the latest next.
Which was not true. Then it was, I never met with any Russians to discuss any political campaign, which may or may not be true. Now it's, I did not discuss interference in the campaign.
Let me just say this without hesitation, that I conducted no improper discussions with Russians at any time regarding a campaign or any other item facing this country.
A heated exchange this week between Democratic Senator Al Franken and Attorney General Jeff Sessions over then Senator Sessions' communications with the Russians during the 2016 presidential election. That exchange at a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing Wednesday came the same day as two top officials at Fusion GPS, the opposition research firm behind the unverified dossier alleging Russian ties to the Trump campaign, invoked their Fifth Amendment rights before the House Intelligence Committee. The FBI this week also posted a document suggesting that former Director James Comey began drafting his statement exonerating Hillary Clinton in the email probe months before his July 2016 announcement. We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, and Bill McGurn. So, Kim, let's start off with Fusion GPS. Why should we care about this company?
Well, look, Paul, we have House investigators and special counsel Robert Mueller looking into allegations that the Trump campaign colluded with Russians. And we need the answers to that question, but it's also reasonable to want to know where some of those allegations came from. And a lot came from this dossier that Fusion GPS commissioned with the help of a former British spook who we now know was working with some Russians. We need to understand the extent to which Russia influenced that dossier, if at all, and whether or not our law enforcement then relied on a piece of disinformation to conduct its probe into Trump.
So it could be, Kim, and what we're trying to find out is, did this American company commission this document and therefore promote that included a lot of Russian disinformation, and then that could have actually started the FBI investigation back in 2016 into the Trump campaign? Could that have been the start of it all?
Well, it's unlikely that it started it, but it seems very clear that the FBI in some form or fashion may have relied on this document to ramp up its investigation, potentially even to get some of the warrants that it used. And the House Intelligence Committee is struggling not just to get Fusion to give it information about the origin of this document and what went into it, but struggling to get the FBI to hand over information about how it ended up using the document.
All right, Bill, and this Steele dossier, Christopher Steele is the former spy that Kim talked about. Has this been corroborated, or is it largely discredited?
No, a lot of us call it discredited because there have been individual aspects such as Trump's lawyer meeting in Prague, and he's never been to Prague, and so forth.
So a lot of it is false.
I think Fusion says that they stand by it. And again, if we're really going to understand Russia's role, we'd like to know who paid for this. It looks like at one point that Christopher Steele had a relationship with the FBI to pay for some things, then they didn't pay. But we need to know that. The FBI is being very uncooperative. And, of course, Senator Al Franken would like to keep us stuck back in November 2016 and focusing on Jeff Sessions. There's been no other information showing Jeff Sessions did anything improper and he recused himself. We need a lot of answers on the other side of it. What's mystifying for Jeff Sessions is that the Donald Trump Department of Justice is stonewalling congressional efforts to find out about this damaging dossier on Donald Trump.
Well, but Sessions has recused himself from that, so that responsibility would fall to Rod Rosenstein, the deputy AG. Why don't they turn it over, Dan? I don't understand.
I don't either, except that, you know, these are the security and intelligence services, the FBI, and usually the wagons get circled under circumstances like this. But this is one instance in which maybe that circle should be broken, because I think one of the Democrats here do protest it too much. The reason they are cranking it up to this level is because I think, A, we need to know where this dossier came from, and B, I think there is a big question of whether the Obama administration, if I may put it this way, was colluding with the security and intelligence services. I mean, they're the ones who distributed some of this information about the possibility of Trump having involvement with the Russians. That got leaked into the press. That's how all of this started.
Well, the intelligence services and the FBI, they work for the Obama administration.
Well, I mean, this is supposed to be basically independent operations that make judgments on their own. They aren't a tool, a political tool of a presidential administration like that.
To Dan's point, we also have at the same time this parallel scandal about unmasking. And Samantha Power, we know, asked for hundreds of
former U.S. ambassador.
Now she's saying she didn't quite ask for them. I mean, it's unclear whether she asked on behalf of other people or other people used her name. I mean, all this is coming together. Look, the president tweeted out something, again, to Dan's point, that's just outraging the Democrats, saying who paid for this Fusion dossier? Was it the Democrats, the Kremlin, or the FBI? And it's reasonable questions given what we know.
Why do we want to know this, Kim? And do we really, I mean, and are we going to get, I guess, let me put it this way, are we going to get to the bottom of this? Are these people going to be able to get away with not testifying and not cooperating?
Well, look, let's just back up for a second. The question that we're trying to answer is how did Russia or did Russia influence or interfere in our election? And if it turns out that there was a document that Democrats paid for or commissioned that Russians ended up influencing to plant disinformation about a presidential candidate and inspire law enforcement to take action, that would definitely be interfering in our election process. So we need to know. Now, the House is sent out subpoenas. Fusion has refused to testify, but there are other ways that the House can try to get some of the information that might explain who paid for everything, and we'll see that they could be held in contempt. We've still got a long way to go on this.
All right, thank you very much, Kim. Still ahead, Facebook is under fire amid the growing furor over Russia's use of social media to influence the 2016 presidential race. But could $100,000 in ads really swing an election? We'll ask a former Clinton advisor next.
Some of the Facebook ads specifically targeted Michigan and Wisconsin, two of the states that decided the election by razor-thin margins, which suggests that the Russian strategy was even more sophisticated than we knew.
company revealed last month that a Russian firm with links to the Kremlin bought more than $100,000 worth of ads on Facebook between June 2015 and May 2017. But would that be enough to influence the outcome of a presidential race? Mark Penn is managing director of the Stagwell Group. He was chief strategist on Bill Clinton's 1996 presidential campaign, Hillary Clinton's 2000 Senate campaign, and Mrs. Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign. So, Mark, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you.
You wrote an intriguing piece for us this week suggesting that $100,000 can't buy an election. Why don't you explain that?
Well, look, the premise of the piece is enough fake news about fake news. That if you just took a little simple math, Facebook told us that 56% were spent after the election. So only $44,000 could even have been in the election period. That most of it didn't refer to a candidate, that most of it was not in swing states. By the time you do the simple math, you get down to about $6,500 may have been in swing states during the year of the election. It's incredible that we're spending all this time talking about something like that just a little math explodes.
All right, but there's a sort of a sense that I get talking to Democrats that says, you know, this election was so close in those key Midwestern states, so close in Wisconsin, that if foreign agents, foreign sources just poured a little money into those districts with a message that looked to be anti-Clinton or anti-Obama, then you could actually influence the election in those states and turn the Electoral College.
I wish that it was so easy. I mean, $2.4 billion were spent on this presidential election. Hillary Clinton had a $400 million advantage over Donald Trump. And just in the last week, her super PAC put $6 million into Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Florida to suggest that a few $1,000s of these incredibly targeted ads, which they weren't, they didn't even know when the election day was, is ludicrous. And we have to be honest with ourselves. Whether this argument hurts or helps Democrats, we have to have some honest, fact-based discussions in this country.
All right, you compared this in your piece to what the Chinese tried to do in 1996, and we know there's an attempt by foreign agents there to influence the campaign on behalf of Bill Clinton. But you say, that wasn't decisive either.
Well, it wasn't decisive. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was probably bigger, and of course money meant a little bit more in 1996. It was probably bigger, but we kept it in proportion. We did investigate it. There were some fundraisers who were prosecuted. It was clear the Chinese government had a, quote, China plan. Mm-hmm. No, it wasn't decisive, but we didn't make it a national fixation. We tightened up validation procedures about foreign contributions, and we should tighten up fake accounts and, clearing ads and things like that. We should clear that up. We should take this as a warning that this wasn't something that really made a difference, but somebody could in the future.
All right, so your advice to Facebook, Twitter, and social media sites would be basically you're going to have to dig into who the sources of these things, these ads are in the next election and make sure you screen out these foreign-sourced ads, because obviously if we knew that a Russian ad was buying a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal, for example, attacking a candidate, we wouldn't take the money.
Well, technically, the Supreme Court has protected non-candidate issue communications. So Facebook has a lot of issues to consider. I guess the point is, look, in good faith, you should have the basic procedures that a lot of TV stations have for ads, that you run through political ads. You should really do your best on fake accounts and make sure this doesn't become a real problem because because we got so overheated here in doing this. It could become a real problem, but it wasn't.
Okay. Now, your party, the Democratic Party, are they paying too much attention here, in your view, to Russia's role in the election and saying, look, with the idea that made this Trump's victory illegitimate? Are they just focusing too much on that, the last election, and not enough on the next one?
Yeah, look, I think where the Democrats have had the strongest ground so far has been on health care. I think they clearly won the argument on health care. I think as President Obama went out yesterday, I think they seem less divided. I think the extent to which I think everybody attacks our democracy or calls it illegitimate or divides the country, I don't think anybody wins in that discussion. I think the people who win in this discussion are those who unite the country. 91% in my Harvard-Harris poll want Democrats and Republicans to work together, even though they dislike them all in today's politics.
All right, thank you for being here, Mark Penn. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
When we come back, a bipartisan bill on Obamacare FACE Act appeared to be on thin ice late this week after President Trump signaled his disapproval. The Senate bill, sponsored by Republican Lamar Alexander and Democrat Patty Murray, would fund for 2 years the subsidies to health insurers that the administration cut off last week. After initially signaling his support for the plan, President Trump appeared to change course, tweeting, quote, "I am supportive of Lamar as a person and also of the process, but I can never support bailing out insurance companies who have made a fortune with Obamacare." We're back with Dan Henninger, Kim Strassel, and Kate Batchelder Odell. So, Kate, what do Democrats get out of this deal?
Well, they get 2 years of cost-sharing subsidies, which flow to insurers that defray the cost of deductibles and copays for low-income people. They also get about $100 million in Obamacare advertising funding, and it's funny to imagine
to sign people up.
Yes, it's funny to imagine they think that the marketing is really the problem. But on the GOP side, what they get is a more ostensible state flexibility. Now, Obamacare proponents will always tell you that, you know, states can just send in a waiver and do whatever they want. But this is not actually true. The law sets all sorts of restrictions on the benefits have to be as comprehensive as what Obamacare requires. It has to be at least as affordable. Essentially, it says, governors, try whatever you want as long as it's Obamacare or single
payer. But does this language change in this compromise actually deregulate those restrictions?
Well, the problem is it doesn't do enough. It basically is a small language change on affordability that would allow some waivers that have been held up in this long, lengthy application process to move through. But it doesn't throw off the shackles of Obamacare and say, try experiment with health savings accounts or anything else.
So why would Republicans like Lamar support it?
Well, it's basically a prudential political choice. It amounts to, are Republicans going to take the blame for these subsidies getting cut off? Is there going to be chaos in the individual insurance market?
But you've argued that there won't be chaos because the subsidies will go up to compensate. This is subsidies to individuals to compensate for the lack of the subsidies to insurers. But prices will go up, right?
Premiums will go up. And you're right, the tax credits will cover the delta for the cost-sharing subsidies, so the insurers get paid anyway. So I guess it's really more the perception of chaos. Are we going to have headlines for weeks and months about 20% premium increases, and what do Republicans think about that? Also, this money was being spent illegally, and I think Congress should try to appropriate and make it legal.
Because Congress sued President Obama for these subsidies, and a federal judge said this violates the Constitution because there's no appropriation for them. So, Kim, what do you think of the politics here? I mean, are you with Alexander or the skeptics?
With the skeptics, look, the Republicans have this amazing opportunity right now to offer the Democrats one of the only thing that Democrats care about, which is more money to spend. And if they're going to do a deal, they should drive a pretty hard bargain. So either that can be done by Lamar Alexander and continuing negotiations in the Senate, and I think that that is what President Trump is trying to push happen with some of his skepticism, say get a better deal here. Or probably even better, it would be a great thing to see House Republicans attempt to redeem themselves on health care by coming up with a stronger bargain in the House and then sending it over to the Senate and putting some pressure from that direction.
But Dan, they don't want to vote on this in the House because it's not going to be repeal and replace. It's going to be essentially we're propping it up in return for some reform.
Yeah, and I think the White House has begun to recognize that. I mean, I think probably what President Trump was saying was not being able to support this is he understands that the really big important vote coming up for him in the House is on that tax bill.
Right.
And since they opposed Obamacare the first time around, he does not want a repeat of disaffected House Republicans saying they're forcing a bad Obamacare reform on us, not now we're going to have some problems with the tax bill. He's not going to take that risk.
Kate, do you think that the Democrats are going to go along with any kind of reform that Kim suggests the Republicans should seek?
I'm not sure. I doubt it. But I think what we're getting at is the essential health care problem, which is what can pass the House can't clear the Senate, and what clears the Senate can't get through the House. But what's the alternative? Give up? I mean, they have to try something, and I think there are a lot of reformers putting out good ideas on delaying the employer mandate, on loosening the or delaying the or repealing or just getting rid of the individual mandate, or allowing more health savings accounts or other arrangements. So I think that they have an obligation to keep trying to negotiate.
And Kim, briefly, are you worried at all about, I mean, the politics here for the Republicans is that they could get blamed for premium increases. You think they should worry about that?
They should worry about it, absolutely. This is not necessarily the Pottery Barn rule anymore. Democrats broke it, but Republicans now own it, and they are going to have to take some efforts to fix it.
Okay, thank you all. We have to take one more break. When we come back, hits and misses. Time now for our hits and misses of the week. Kim, first to you.
So this is a miss to California, where Governor Jerry Brown recently signed a bill that allows residents, and this is a first ever in the country, allows residents to choose a third non-binary gender option on all of their state IDs. So birth certificates, driver's licenses. You know, Paul, I'm a big fan that in our personal relations, we all need to respect each other, but that's a far cry from forcing state officials to have to choose to deal with people on their feelings rather than the facts of their birth.
All right, Bill.
Paul, big hit to Tom McCabe and the Freedom Foundation in Washington State. He and his Merry Warriors have been trying to inform home health care workers they don't need to join a union to do their jobs. When they did, 10,000 people opted out of the union, and the SEI sued.
SEIU, yeah.
SEIU. So now a judge has thrown out that suit. The SEIU was complaining that they were interfering in their business model. Judge has thrown it out. Big victory for workers' rights. It tells you something about the argument today that it's the unions trying not to let workers know their rights.
Mary.
I'm giving a miss to Quebec for banning face veils. This is aimed at Muslim women who wear things like hijabs and burqas. If you've gotten to the point where you're banning things, I think you've lost the argument. And I think it just goes to show two things, Paul. Controversial things do actually happen north of the border, but secondly, look, identity politics isn't just an American affliction. It happens in Canada, too.
Dan.
Okay, Paul, a big hit to a comedy group at Brigham Young University called Studio C. They have amassed 1 billion views on YouTube, mostly college students, despite the fact that their comedy is squeaky clean. Hard to believe you can actually still make people laugh without wallowing in the gutter. So I think this Studio C, Brigham Young University, this could be the start of something good.
All right, Dan, thank you. And remember, if you have your own hit or miss, be sure to tweet it to us at JER on FNC. That's it for this week's show. Thanks to my panel. Thanks to you for watching. I'm Paul Gigot. Hope to see you right here next week.
The White House doubling down in its war of words with a Florida congresswoman. The drama unfolding with Chief of Staff John Kelly in the middle of it all, trading accusations with Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. Hello, welcome to a brand new hour inside America's News Headquarters. I'm Kelly Wright.
And I'm Julie Banderas. President Trump is standing by General Kelly as a top aide, also praises him in strong terms. Listen.
I think that we're incredibly blessed to work with someone like General Kelly, who the President has appointed to serve as Chief of Staff. Very few people have sacrificed as much for our country as he has. And I think it's really sad that she has chosen to try to politicize this moment when we really should be focused on those who have sacrificed their greatest, the ultimate sacrifice to preserve the freedoms that we all enjoy in this country.
The president is also ramping up verbal attacks against Wilson, tweeting this morning, quote, "I hope the fake news media keeps talking about wacky Congresswoman Wilson and that she, as a representative, is killing the Democrat Party." Kristen Fisher is live from the White House with more details. Kristen?
Hey, Kelly, well, keep in mind, this is all happening on the very same day as the funeral for the American soldier killed in Niger, Sergeant LaDavid Johnson, whose widow has really found herself at the center of this controversy between the White House and Congresswoman Wilson. Sergeant Johnson was laid to rest a few hours ago in Florida, a few days after President Trump's call to his widow. You know, the White House has been really trying to move past the controversy. They were hoping that briefing room appearance by General Kelly would help them do that. But then this morning, just hours before the funeral was set to start, President Trump weighed in again on Twitter by calling the Congresswoman wacky and saying that she's trying to kill her party. He's also speaking out in an interview airing tomorrow with Maria Bartiromo, in which he called the Congresswoman attacks against his chief of staff sickening. Listen to this.
He was so offended because he was in the room when I made the call, and so were other people. And the call was a very nice call. He was so offended that somebody would be listening to that call. He actually couldn't believe it. Actually, he said to me, "Sir, this is not acceptable."
Also not acceptable, according to Senator John McCain, was the lack of information that the Trump administration was providing to the Senate about the attack in Niger. So yesterday, the Secretary of Defense met with Senator McCain and his Republican colleague Lindsey Graham on Capitol Hill to quote-unquote, clear things up. Afterwards, Senator McCain said the investigation may still require a subpoena, but that he had a very good conversation with General Mattis. Neither side, though, would give any more details about the attack, and the White House is saying that it will not rest until it gets some answers. Kelly?
Well, another story now. New reports say President Trump is spending his own money to help with his staff's legal bills. What can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right. According to a White House official, President Trump has promised to spend more than $400,000 worth of his own money to help his staffers and former campaign associates pay for their mounting legal bills that are associated with all of these Russia investigations, from the investigations on Capitol Hill to the investigation with the special counsel, Robert Mueller. Now, there are still a lot of questions here, namely, who decides which staffers get this money? When do they get it? None of those questions have been answered at this point in time. But, this is a lot of money, $400,000, but at the same time, it's also not a lot of money given the amount of the investigations, the length of time in which these investigations are going to go on. So another question, Kelly, would have to be, at some point in time, could that amount expand? Could President Trump promise to give even more money down the road? But right now, the number that we're hearing is just over $400,000, about $430,000 to be exact. Kelly?
Kristen, thanks for the update. A lot going on there from the White House. Kristen Fisher, thanks.
In a rare joint appearance, all 5 former living presidents are uniting for one mission: to help raise money for hurricane relief efforts. The former presidents